Is your existing supply chain and logistics consultancy provider failing to deliver? Our experienced, thought-leading team at Loguru could be your choice for an intelligent and friendly professional supply chain. If you have a challenge in supply chain, procurement or logistics, or maybe just want to improve the value you get from them, visit loguru.co.uk. Complete end-to-end satisfaction guaranteed.
Coming up in this episode.
It's an RFID glove. We turn the technology to go near field. I'm at the shelf. I've got 20 bags of crisps and I just touch each item as I go through and do my freshness check. And I get a green to say it's in code, an amber to say the sell-by date, which doesn't appear anymore, is fast approaching. Perhaps it's an opportunity to mark down, and a red to say remove because it should have been picked in the freshness check.
The Logistics Collective podcast is a series focused on the logistics industry, where there are many incredible stories to be told. We'll be speaking with those who've worked and are working within the industry today. What have been their experiences, good and bad, since joining, and would they recommend a career in the industry to others? Here's your host, Malcolm Pope.
Hello and welcome to Logistics Collective, the podcast. And this is the third and final episode in this series with Mark Tailford, who is, the thinking retailer's expert on product ID, I guess. But what you couldn't see there is what Mark was doing, because we record this over a Teams meeting and he's gesticulating at me, trying to make me corpse, and it's not going to happen. So anyway, Mark, lovely to have you back.
Thank you.
Now, we've sort of covered the ghosts of retail past and retail present. Now we want to focus on what is yet to be. But before we head in that yet to be, let's think about if we were looking at a scorecard in terms of visibility, supply chain or supply network visibility. Where are the gaps? Because there are gaps. There are clearly gaps within there. What do you see?
If I go back before going forward, the way that retail dominated a lot of our lives in the 80s, 90s and noughties was because those tough decisions that the supply chains execs and businesses took to get us into that place where we could scale and we could get good service. And I hear so much over the last decade that, the high street's broken and we need to find a fix to the problems that have existed in that area. I think retail has to put its hand up and say that at times they haven't listened to businesses like Loguru and the experts who you've got within your business, who have come in and just given some common sense views on how you deliver product in a timely fashion. And part of that is to be able to track that what's being delivered is the item that was ordered. It's quite simple. So I think with a lack of investment in the arteries that deliver into that high street, the high street was always going to struggle. Of course, we've seen many of the high street retailers go out of town and try other things, coffee shops in-house and all of these things. But, clearly we're getting overrun with coffee shops now. But, when you visit some of the provincial towns and you see a burgeoning local retail community. I was visiting Cirencester, which is where I grew up, recently to visit some old friends. And literally, the place was buzzing with brands that I'd not heard of, and people were buying locally. There is a lot of hope. Definitely, as we turned inventory accuracy from the 60% to 98% plus, now that means that you've got a chance of being able to find the product more easily. However, again, I come back to my point, which is that, so we're tracking the apparel items or clothing or furniture items, and yet we've not been able to track food and medicines, which are far more important, in my opinion, because you're putting them inside your body. So what do they say? Sometimes innovation leads it and sometimes legislation. And so I'm just starting to see great legislation like the DPP has come from the European Union that we're bringing into, I think it's 2028. And so now the food retailers are really keen. Some of them are keen to remove the sell-by dates. That makes me sweat a little bit. But now if we've got some unique intelligence on the bag of crisps or whatever it might be, to be able to scan those items using RFID or some OCR type of recognition, because the need for health checks and product freshness checks are going to increase. But if we can now start to track, when an item needs to be really recalled, because many retailers still do a blanket recall of products, and they're wasting products that are perfectly good. And that would be a common theme that I've seen in my career in retail that we still haven't quite addressed, the waste that's involved. I can count many cases where perfectly good items didn't get marked down when they should have been, and then get binned in the skips or whatever, when at the same time we've got homeless people who really struggle to find food. So I hope that DPP legislation and this circular economy, which is very, very powerful. I've just met 3 retailers, 2 in the UK, 1 in India, that's valued about $500 million, who are utilising the scraps off the factory floors of these apparel factories to create their own products, and to provide, in the one in India, to provide clothing and footwear to people who would normally not be able to buy anything. So I'm seeing this circular economy. And of course, I've been a coach in business, but also a coach in sporting teams for my son's teams, and they've grown up with a real awareness of the environment. Now, I think if we look back at history, we were talking, from the 60s, we were talking about these things, but we made so many mistakes, and now is the time to learn from those mistakes. So this circular economy now, for years, people complained that, a town near me, Kenilworth High Street, full of charity shops. And we know why it's full of charity shops. There are benefits for those businesses to be a charity, and they're doing, and at their heart, they are doing things that are good for people in the globe. But actually now, imagine if we can now give the assurance to the people that are buying that second-hand product of the life of the product, just like we do with a car. We know the history of a car because it's been monitored when we're buying a second-hand car. So therefore, we feel comfortable in purchasing. We never had that with second-hand clothing, second-hand footwear. But now with having ID, like I've just been talking about, a thread that can go into items, and it can be tracked through numerous washes. So therefore, if I'm going into an Oxfam store, I'll be able to see the history of that product, and that should give me A, confidence in the brand's authentication, and B, an understanding of its history. A really interesting thing, one of my dearest partners over these years, a company called Columbus Consulting, they're a team of retail ex-merchandisers, and they visited one of their clients last week in the Midlands. It's a charity shop. Visited their DC, and the retailer said, "No, unfortunately, we can't get a better accuracy because we don't have any RFID tags." They borrowed one of my guns from ASReader, and they found out that 10% of the items in their DC had RFID tags. So 11,000 items. This feeling that, we can't do this because we don't have it, is not true until you find out and you test it for yourselves.
So, DPP, digital passports?
Digital product passports. So it's the need to have an item level ID on every single product.
Okay, and then I'll then go and have a look in terms of my own experience. And okay, for me, I've come through chemist and food industry. I've been in charge of quality systems, implemented warehouse management systems and transport management systems, and managed these all the way through. And I understand in terms of the rigor of information that is actually available through that. And so when it's passed to retail in general, we will turn around and say, here's a product. We'll identify the SKU. We will give them a batch code. We'll obviously give them a SKU reference as well. And we'll give them either a use by or BBE date. And that will be probably interfaced into the retailer. That'll go through their own logistics network. And then that will then end up in the retail store. And then interestingly, it seems to, for some retailers at least, it seems to break down at store level. And the reason that I felt this was to be the case, and I might be wrong, you might disabuse me of this, is whenever I looked at product recall, and product recall is something that I've always, I mean, the amount of effort that any food manufacturer will put into looking and worrying about product recall, because this is the point at which you can really damage and kill people. That's why it's important.
Yeah. Yes.
And you look at the effort that goes in terms of those processes and procedures that are in play. And then you'll go down to local retailer. I'm not going to name names. And I don't know, you've picked a pot of yogurt off the chill section. And then all of a sudden, you've got your basket and they're doing the barcode scan and they'll get a warning. Bleep. Yep. And then whoever is on the checkout, they get an instruction on the screen that says, please check, comes out. And the clipboard then will have the batch and the use by or the BBE that is actually involved in this. And they will very apologetically say, well, we're awfully sorry, we've got a problem with that. Let's see if we can get you a suitable replacement.
Yeah.
And I thought about this. And then I looked at the way recalls then work and said, well, okay, generally you'll find in the press, you'll find some adverts, so, don't use these fluffy zip-up slippers, you might fall over.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. And then you'll go to your local zip-up slipper retailer of choice, and you'll generally find a little poster up on the front door saying, if you bought these zip-up slippers, please return them to us. I just thought that's a bit pants, really, isn't it? Because all of that information is, in theory, available, but the systems, it doesn't seem to have flown through. Is that a fair representation in your view?
It is. It's way too late in the day that those recalls are happening with the intelligence that we have with item level. And that means that every pot of yogurt, even if it's the same flavour, size, pot and style, has its unique ID. And when you progress to that, like the apparel retailers have now, we're able to track the ones that we want to take off and keep the ones that should stay on for sale. And that applies to freshness as well. Really, those products should have been recalled and replened with a suitable product way before you picked it up off the shelf. And that's the dynamism that DPP and item level ID gives retailers.
But only if they're set up to actually do something with that information.
Exactly. So that has to be a key part of the whole strategy in the supply chain of how you bring your products from farm to the shelf. And if you don't invest in that strategy, then how are you expecting assistants to be able to deal with the customers and be able to give good service? So you can only do that where you have that item level ID. So for me, we see lots of innovation that comes out and breaks to the news, like Amazon Go. Okay. That business can afford to spend lots of money on cameras in the short term. Yeah, whether it's the long term, I don't know. It's to give this seamless shopping experience. And certainly in the cities where people are busier, it seemed like a good idea. But all the other retailers have said, we can't afford this. This is, it's like so many cameras in the stores. So what we showed at the recent NRF retail show in New York, and I'm a massive believer that I want retail assistants to have both hands available for their customers, because you don't know when a product falls off the shelf. If I see someone with a clipboard or they're on a tablet, I already think they're doing something else, so I don't want to disturb them. So I've always been a great believer that, some of these handheld terminals should be put in a belt so that most of the time they look available to serve you. So we took that lead and we showed it's an RFID glove. And we can now, we've taken the technology, because RFID, the nice thing about RFID is that I could go in a warehouse with a gun and read everything in a fraction of the time it takes for a barcode, and really accurately. You can't read it if it's not there with RFID. What we did here, we turned the technology to go near field so that you couldn't read a second RFID tag. So now imagine I'm at the shelf, I've got 20 bags of crisps, and I don't know whether they're in touch, and I just touch each item as I go through and do my freshness check, and I get a green to say it's in code, an amber to say the sell-by date, which doesn't appear anymore, is fast approaching. Perhaps it's an opportunity to mark down, and a red to say remove, because it should have been picked in the freshness check. And when we get to that instinctive piece that people, when they're tidying, they're calling it facing up in an evening, when we make the store look pretty again. When we're doing that process, if we're just touching the item, we're getting feedback. It's a one-to-one between the user and the unique product. People said for years, the cost of RFID tags is too expensive to go on a can of beans. Well, I would say, if those can of beans have suddenly been, subjected to some type of attack, with some substance or something in there, or had glass in there, it's too expensive not to. And, it's the same thing, isn't it? The square wheel didn't work very well, but the round one seemed to do really well. And we need to be tracking things. If we value the lives of the people and the enjoyment that they get from a product, we need to be tracking much better.
But I think it goes even beyond that very noble view. I mean, for me, I'm sort of surprised. I was surprised where the limits of visibility were. And I'm also, I sort of looked at things. I mean, the pandemic was an excellent time to think.
Yes.
So, we've had one thread of thinking about, well, why are the majority of transport management systems so dumb? And we've been doing some really interesting work in terms of why they need to be better and why they need to be more sustainable, and why actually they need to help LSPs make some profit, because the LSPs are going to have to invest hugely in terms of more sustainable logistics solutions in the future. And buying a few trucks, buying a few electric trucks, and putting a windmill up on a site, it isn't enough. I'm sorry, guys. I know I'm probably regarded on occasions as an irritant, but I'll go and make an evaluation and say, look, it's just not good enough, guys. You need to be thinking beyond. Go and double your profitability, because I think you can. In terms of looking at this sort of product visibility, I'm fascinated by it, because we collect so much information but have no wisdom. So I'll go and have a look and say, well, most people are using some level of loyalty card information. But the loyalty card information doesn't give me, I don't get the BBE in use, but I just think that's, you're passing your problem on to your customer. And don't be too surprised if your customer decides to take the business elsewhere. We all have, we've all experienced the home delivery whereby, a local store manager sees it as an outlet for moving short-dated stock. So that actually means for the customers that are incredibly loyal to you, that are paying a fee for that delivery and probably aren't going to move away from you, you're punishing them with your short-dated stock problem. And I actually think I'm amazed that we don't bring use by and BBEs into them. But then we look at the home and we say, what supply chain management tools are available in the home? And you come to a view of nada, nothing, no visibility at all. And you've got literally tens of thousands of SKUs within your home.
Yeah.
But you don't know what you've got. And okay, some people are good. They'll have their spring clean. They'll check the clothes out that they're not using, or they don't. But they don't have visibility of it. They have nothing that's turning around and saying, what's been in your loft for the last 10 years, that actually somebody else could make good use out of. And so I begin to think of a future, and if we let's start with food waste and say the majority of food going to landfill isn't from retailers or from food manufacturers, it's from our homes.
Yes. Yeah.
Because what we're bad at is meal planning, and I'm not saying every house, but most of the time we're in a situation whereby, because we're living very busy lives, you'll get to that and, I'm a bit sort of date code nervous, and so if that's one day over, I'm not going to have it. Now, it may or may not be safe, but then what you're then relying by not providing this information, and here's the view. I used to be an oils and fats chemist, and we used to have the subjective organoleptic appraisal of the off flavors of oils and fats. So that basically meant you tasted it and you smelt it. Now that's great if you don't have anosmia or you've not lost your sense of taste. And so what you're then saying is that for that disability, we're actually putting people in some level of peril, in my view. And I just think it's nuts. I think it's crazy. Don't take things away from people, give them more. I look at a lot of the, if you like, the retail apps whereby you can do your ordering. Well, heaven's sake, give us BBE. Tell us when we should eat it. Give us a reminder. But then, even then, taking that outside of that, and that's part of the work that we wanted to do with Ample as a concept, that we really, we thought about it and said, well, okay, how could we make this happen? And we realised the restriction in terms of trying to do it on barcode, and because the retailers didn't freely offer this information, it was hard to capture. Although we did find a sort of doohickey way of doing it. But in terms of the overall idea and process of doing it, quite well developed. But then, you get into RFID, and have I worked with RFID before? Yes, going all the way back to my time working for RHM PLC and the work that we did with M&S, and of course the green trays that they had, the RFID trays. And why were everything in trays? Because it was too damned expensive to put an RFID tag. Now, it's fascinating to me. I mean, we say 5 euro cents for an RFID tag. If all of a sudden you then multiply the production of those incredibly, then that's probably only going to go one way. The costs will probably come down. But that is lifetime visibility is worth something. I would sort of imagine that you could have a circumstance under which you've got a visibility of what you haven't moved and what you haven't used. That suit that I've got in the back of the wardrobe that I know that I'm keeping there just in case I do move my backside around enough and drop some weight, and I will get back into it. What's the truth of the matter? Possibly isn't going to happen. It might do, but possibly isn't. I just imagine a circumstance whereby, okay, my household inventory is pollable because we've got more inventory in our domestic environments than we have within any of our retail or manufacturing supply chains. And that, for me, is sort of releasing. I came to a conclusion of how many lawnmowers do we actually need in the country?
True. Yeah, true.
And I sort of look at, if you had shared resources, well, why do you have to own one of the damn things? I mean, farmers, what they do now is that they have somebody else that comes and cuts it for them. They don't have all of the capital costs behind. But how many lawnmowers do you really damn well need? I mean, I've got 2.
Yeah.
I've got an old flying mow that, is there just in case, the lawn gets a bit muddy and that'll go over it. Or I've got a battery-powered something else. That's to stop me having to trail a cable all over the place. But every single house locally has probably got at least one. Why? It fascinates me.
We could get so much more collaborative in our homes by using accessible data, accessible lawnmowers, by working together. Yeah.
Yeah, I already know because we have weather in the UK. You only have so many mowing days, and with the best will in the world, they're probably going to all be needed at the same time because that's what tends to happen. But the principle within there is that if you were looking at it perhaps on the basis of, well, lawnmower was your sole reason to be.
Well, if you take an estate of 50 people, 50 homes, you'd probably say that maybe half of them would be quite happy to have the extra space that their lawnmower takes up. So immediately you've gone down from 50 or maybe 100 mowers to 30. That's a positive step, unless you want to keep selling lots of lawnmowers. I also think when I saw, obviously with the pandemic, and then the retailers had to think on their feet because people weren't coming to stores anymore, well, certainly non-food.
I call this as a trend, I mean, including Amazon Go and all of the self-checkouts.
Yeah.
I call it sociopathic retail.
Yeah, it's a great phrase.
And, for me, it is actually, I'm a people person.
Yeah.
And I like to have my chat with people on the way. It's not that I'm some sort of technophobe.
Yeah.
But I actually regard it as being vastly more convenient for me. I get some social interaction as a result of it. And actually, I don't have to stand around for minutes waiting for somebody because there's bound to be a bottle of wine in anything that I bought that has to come and do an age check and says, I mean, the fact that the tech isn't as clever enough to be able to turn around and say, look, you're a bit of an old geezer, you are, Malcolm, so, you're okay. I mean, it's not that clever.
If you take out the differentiators while you visit a store or you visit a website and you take out that people element, you really are starting to narrow this down to the product being available. So again, it lends itself to making sure you've got your inventory right and price. And because where I would visit a John Lewis or a Marks and Spencer and, have a good service as well, as, with a polite hello and how's your day been and have a good day, all of that sort of stuff. Now, if I haven't got that experience, then I'm going to focus solely on the ability. So the other day I went into a store and just want to pick up some fresh things because we live in a town, so we can walk and pick up fresh for some friends that were coming over for dinner. And the internet was down and they couldn't take any payments. So they were like, oh, we could only take cash. And literally, and there was no messaging. So everyone was doing the shopping, arriving at the self-checkout and not being able to, because I'm like royalty, I've never carried cash. And then loads of customers on that Saturday morning were lost because there was no touch points apart from one saying, sorry, unless you've got cash. And that was it. And it was like, oh, okay, too late by that. Like your analogy about the product being out of date or being recalled, it's too late. When I saw in the pandemic the retailers being forced, because of terrible situation, to suddenly make online or BOPIS or curbside orders unlimited, so you could place 100 orders on Next, try on 100 and buy one and return the 99. I just felt this was like, oh my word, I saw this with the catalogue companies back in the 80s. And look what happened to a lot of those. And now they're so desperate to the hope that you'll buy something from those 100 items. And it felt like desperate. It just felt that the retailers didn't know their customers well enough to give a curated solution. And that's where I feel the people that are in touch with this circular economy, so they're also doing good by making products, often from waste. It's not just the green people that were there, my mother, it was saving water back in the 60s and 70s from the washing machine and use it on the plants. So I became quite nimble. I think it helped my football, being able to dodge between all these buckets of water that were everywhere. She's doing it today still, and taking water off the roof and everything. And that's they're the leaders in terms of showing the way. But actually now, what we're talking about is a much more intelligent customer that wants to know the history of the product they're about to buy and knowing that they're doing good by doing it as well.
So this is sustainable provenance, isn't it?
It is.
That's what it is. It is about provenance. But then are you similarly amazed that when we go into our homes, the stuff that we have around us doesn't really help us?
Yeah. You made the point. Yeah.
It helps the consumption. I can place a demand, but it doesn't help me manage. It doesn't give me a view of do this, move this on. And I actually find it sort of interesting that you could generate a whole new domestic economy as a result of doing that. But given our government's current focus on wanting to look very closely at what people are doing on eBay, Lord knows where that will go. But for me, I think that is a force for good. I had zero shame. I still have zero shame, is that I'll buy secondhand stuff, and I always have. And because I'll just sort of look at it and say, well, depreciation's fascinating, isn't it? It's your friend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Depreciation is your friend.
No, everyone understands what that is now. And, you made the analogy about the lofts. In the last house, we had 3 lofts. And every time, if with hindsight, if I knew that every time I opened it to put something up, they would never be used again, that would have told me a story. Because eventually, I've taken it to the charity shops. And in fairness, to one of the charity shops, they said, Mark, it's wonderful that you're bringing such stuff, but we wish you'd have been doing it over the last 10 years because now we need to get extra people in to manage the amount that's coming in from you and other people who have realised the error of their ways. And
it's sort of interesting, one of the experiences I had. We tend to, one of the things that we do have, sadly, eventually some of your elder relatives do pass on.
Yes.
And then you get into that interesting experience of a house clearance. And it's tough to damn well do because there's an emotional attachment that's within there. But finally, I was trying to get rid of what was, a really nice sideboard, but it was in yew wood. And it was solid yew wood. It was an expensive piece of furniture when it was bought. And the table and chairs that was matching, the local charity would take. But they said, I won't take they won't take it even for free. No, it won't move. It won't shift. Things like that. Nobody wants them. I had a similar experience then when I had an auctioneer come into my parents' house. And what they said is that, well, okay, the reason that these things are either worth less or non-saleable is you ask a simple question. Would you want to buy it and put it in your house as a younger person? And the answer is know.
Yes.
And so there's a problem. There's an interesting problem, and also perhaps an interesting opportunity within this, is to say, how do we actually create a wholesale supply chain for the stuff that is secondhand? How do we actually evaluate that? And how do we actually treat things in a different way? Because, all right, you don't like the colour of something, well, upcycle it.
Yeah.
That's the keynote. But this is not done in any sense on an industrial scale at all. It's all focused on, we take fresh raw materials, and then we build something new. That won't last because it doesn't, and then we'll be facing, a disposal. And I think, this sort of new circular economy, I mean, there are going to be corporate giants that come out of it, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yes.
But I think the foundation is all about provenance, which is why I think digital product passports are so important. It's also why, if you begin to think, I mean, if we're looking at automation, a lot of people will think about, the cobots and the likes of that, or as I like to think about them, they're like the automated Roomba vacuum cleaners that whiz around on occasion.
Yes.
But I actually like human intelligence and supported human intelligence, so not AI, but HI, because it sounds like a greeting, hi. But the sort of thing for me is the ability to have something I can walk in and do a stock check, or if I'm looking at how a warehouse works, there's an awful lot of transactional that is in terms of intake, checking on intake, making sure that I've got the right quantity, is it in good condition, all of that. And then at each stage of the warehouse, there's a transaction. So it'll go from intake, it'll then be put away, so it's in a notional location. It then might be picked to go to a pick face, or it might be picked as a full pallet, and it'll go to a staging area, then to a dispatch area. Each one of those moves, in terms of the way that our current systems work, it's a step. Truth of the matter is, with an RFID tag, it's in the building.
You can locate it. I mean, if we think about it, probably during my career, I've heard there's never a shortage of a desire of humans to want to improve things around them. Yeah, and people do have great charitable tendencies as well. I saw, I think it was in the 90s, intelligent fridge with a barcode reader that you checked it in. You could then keep a spreadsheet of when items were going out of date. An intelligent bin was another idea, but in a way, the technology was ahead of the user. If we think about it now, most users have intelligence in terms of their mobile phone with them at all. Most of the time, it's replaced the wallet. At NRF, again, we've created a software barcode reader that can read QR codes. So when you think QR code, it's kind of that item level.
I've begun to learn more about this. And I did have to suffer a long meeting with Heinz Italy one time talking about EAM 128 barcoding standards, and got to learn a little bit back in the day. But then QR codes are utterly fascinating and configurable. And so it's about the density of information and the configurability of information that you can put at each stage. So barcode is relatively simple. This is what I am. Yeah?
Yes.
In reality. And that's it. It's not going to tell you its best before end date, generally. It's just going to be, I'm this SKU.
It's not going to tell you batch number from the production?
No. Nothing like that. QR code could.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And it can actually store more information in there, so you could put some recycling information in there if you were.
Yes.
There's enough room in order for you to be able to actually do that, and it could link you into something that would have more. Whereas you look at RFID, and this is, well, it's the world in a chip in reality.
Yeah.
I could tell you everything about its provenance, if it was a food product, where it was grown, where it's been moved, how it's been handled, how it's been processed, how it's been packed, how it got to market. It could tell you where it is. Again, this is on a passive basis.
Yes.
It's not pinging out all the time. And the theory would be is that if you had RFID code readers at home, it could say it's in your house and you need to do something about it if you did need to do something about it.
Absolutely.
And this is sort of the the sort of view. I mean, barcode, I mean, is it dead? I don't know.
I think it's always got a place, and I still group QR codes, as a barcode. Okay, a 2D barcode, so it does give us the advantage of being able to put in the item level data. Obviously, you can't read them as quickly as you can with RFID, but there's if I'm putting things and checking stuff in my fridge, think about for recipes and, for people who are very conscious about what they're putting inside their body, it could include the values, the nutritional values of these products as well. It's endless.
Allergens.
Allergy, yeah.
Yeah. All of these things within there, and you could actually make it real. I always sort of sense of, all of this data and none of the wisdom. Fundamentally, you get this product wherever it is, and it's got a story. And maybe I don't need to understand every single story about it, but what I do want to understand is it going to harm me?
Yes.
What's the right time for me to use it? And when it comes to disposal, how should I dispose it? Or if I'm not using it, give it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Pass it on. If you like, sell it to somebody else. It's a little bit like, I'm sort of imagining a new mega intelligent eBay that's, or version thereof that is feeding off, each of your homes, and you're saying, well, actually, it tells you've not used that for 6 months. Yep. I've got a buyer for you. Yeah. There's a box arriving tomorrow. Stick it in it. Here's 20 quid.
Yeah. I mean, the classic, isn't it? Next door, someone's throwing away basil because they didn't use it for a recipe, and it's the one thing you can't find in your supermarket. So that connected environment, as you've seen these like local groups, gives us the way of communicating much better so that we can reduce the waste. It's the single biggest shocker for me of my time in retail to see the amount that's wasted and needn't be. It would be.
Yeah, you could make it almost like a virtual credit. So the view that I would take is let's keep it out the hands of the taxman.
Yeah.
So it's back to bartering. It's back to trading. I've got this. You want it? Okay, I'm going to give you a virtual credit. Yeah. And so next time when I need to get something, then all right, I'm in credit, so I can get something. For me, this is fascinating. I mean, our folks in HMRC will be scratching their heads on this one and wanting to figure out how they would actually make a bit of cash out of it. But
you look at our careers, Malcolm, in supply chain and retail and warehousing and everything. We've been surrounded by good people that at certain times in their career perhaps felt that they. The efforts they put in, weren't recognised, or the ability to grow in the role weren't recognised. So over here in retail, we were a poor relation compared to America, where if, two people in different stores helped someone, I've walked into a store, they haven't got the product, but the person's on the phone to another store and they've got it for me. And we used to, call it, an assist and a goal, or a catch and kill. And American retail assistants were perceived as very creative and therefore would get rewards on the part that they played in that sale, even if they didn't have it in their store. And I really hoped that I'd start to see that in Europe, that retail assistants realized that they were bigger than their own environment and they were part of something bigger. Because we didn't have item level, that was more difficult. But now that we do in apparel, and you've got visibility to 98% plus, there's no reason why I walk into one store and they don't have it. They can tell me categorically without having to go to the back of the store to check the stock room, which most people don't do anyway. And they can tell me they haven't got it. And they can also tell me where they have got it. And we can reserve it with a payment at the shelf side. Yeah. So that transaction has all the power of attracting someone like me into working back into a shop floor if I was 18 again. And we should protect our professions. We should nurture them and encourage them to be valued more. And I can see that happening if we use the data in a wiser way. But again, the work that your team does is helping retailers and brands and distribution companies to be able to help, 3PLs to be able to get to the right answer. Without that item level information, we don't know if it's the right size, style, color. And that's the difference that I think we can make going forward in the future?
I think this is near future as well, because I think it'll drive that way. And I'm just imagining, imagine a really caring retailer that decided it was going to totally embrace the circular economy, totally give every single household an ability to manage what is within there and give them the opportunity to get the value from the stuff that they're not using. Imagine the sense of loyalty. I mean, that's not just a loyalty card. That is true loyalty. That is, you're making my life better. You're treating the planet better. You're trying to actually give those that have got not enough a little bit more and at a lower cost. Or indeed, you might determine that there's a load of stuff that people really struggle in terms of what they're in one of the longest periods of, in this country, of wealth diminishing that I've certainly seen in my lifetime. I mean, the late 70s and 80s were tough. But I regard this as somehow an awful lot tougher. And why not provide some answers as far as this is concerned to make things better?
Yeah, every time we hear about a new technology that is going to change everything, and AI is the latest one. That was a big theme at the recent National Retail Federation Technology Exhibition in New York. Actually, I was on a webinar on Friday evening with a business called Profit Mind. I hadn't come across them before. And, they were talking about AI, but the data that their systems and the way that they were created was fascinating. Because now, and one really interesting stat was that, and it surprised me even, someone who spent his time trying to get inventory right. And he said, well, of course, 90% of the secret to being able to get a happy customer is to get your inventory right. And it reminded me of why I chose inventory, why it's always been a passion to get the right product on the shelf at the right time, in the right quantity. So from being able to have a good, accurate inventory position, you can start to create data that really applies to the individual customer. So I was reassured that this wasn't now just a false technology like we'd heard before that was going to change everything, whereas actually everyone was always looking short term. My desire is to see, the shareholders of these businesses try and find the way to have the confidence to invest longer term. It's very difficult when you've got, the shareholders shouting for profits. But short-term profit, obviously be the problem that doesn't allow you to really create something like you described for the customer, which is trust, loyalty. Without that, they don't have a future. So yeah, it's an interesting state of play that we're in right now.
I mean, I think for me, Loguru as a concept was about having a consultancy that operated in a different way, and maybe people don't appreciate that what we do is that we operate at the very least an 80-20, so 80% of the time we desire to work, but 20% we want to invest in the future. And so we're doing an awful lot as a really small business, a lot of future think, and we're grateful to our clients that give us business to do we do some great, what I would describe as more tactical work. Well, tactical work on a strategic level. I know that sounds like nonsense, but we're really passionate about making sure that our customers are well looked after.
Oh, Malcolm, I've seen that. The work that I've seen your team, with you and Rob and the team, all create, which is not looking after the bottom line of your business in the short term, but it's about putting all these building blocks together to make sense. It really is sense. So that actually, as it gets churned out at the other end, out of the pasta machine, you end up with a blended approach that's balanced, considerate, has all of the stakeholders' needs addressed, and also looks to create something better for the environment and the people that are going to follow us into this world. And that is fantastic for me as a pure play retailer, to see you take the things that we feel that we should have made for the market because there might be a need, to then you say, well, actually, Mark, I know you built that product for this in mind, but we're going to spin it 180 and we're going to bring it earlier in the supply chain. So we start to influence more than, when your wagons and everything are delivering to 30 retailers rather than maybe we were just focused on one. And that's really exciting because that effort that we're putting in to make things better is now getting earlier touch points in the supply chain. And I couldn't do that with RFID first time because no one was willing to educate the manufacturing. And now the manufacturers themselves realize for themselves and the conversations and work with the likes of Loguru that actually we can get a benefit at our item level, because why wouldn't the retailer pay me as soon as we've delivered and fulfilled our role rather than, pay me 30 days after they delivered to their customer? So, retailers were sometimes strangling their supplier, the manufacturer, through credit terms because they couldn't access the data. Now they can.
Often the local sewerage company had actually dealt with the food product before actually the food manufacturer had actually been paid.
Yes.
But I think the other thing within here, there's a massive focus on EPOS and it's the sale process. But we'll use that data to drive. But then I actually say we've got a missing element within here. It's actually not the point of sale that drives demand. It's the point of use that drives demand. And when you're looking at it, a far more accurate view on the likelihood in terms of when is somebody going to make a purchase. So you then is on the basically it's when I've used it, when I've thrown that packaging in the right bin, that is my trigger point. I'm going to seek to reorder. Now we had really smart tech in our houses. That point of use would say, okay, do you want to reorder that? And I'm going to make a decision, yes or no.
Yeah.
Was that product, did you like that product? Or when would you like to have this product again?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yep.
Because you also get another thing. I don't know if you remember with your mum, you'd be turn around and say, it might be something like crispy pancakes. You'd turn around and say, oh, those crispy pancakes were nice. And then for sure, for the next 6 weeks, you were getting crispy pancakes all the damn time. And the truth is that, you liked it because it was a surprise, but you didn't want to have it every single week.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
That sort of measure point, I think, becomes really, really interesting in terms of what you can do. And so for me, my fascination, and I always have been fascinated with RFID. I've seen multiple examples of it being used in my career. And the barrier was cost.
Yeah.
And that barrier is no longer there. And actually, I view it now as that the investment into this arena is about actually investing for the further sustainability, for the further consumer safety, and really for the further visibility, true visibility, within our supply networks. That, for me, I think is incredible. Do I see the big picture in the place of, are people beginning to understand and realise, well, okay, I've got this available, what do I do with it? And it's a little bit like every single piece of technological development. Sometimes you find technology invented that we invented it because we can, but we don't actually understand what we're going to do with it. I think the message to anybody that is in a really senior post within any large-scale organisation is you've got to learn how to ask superhuman questions.
Yes.
You as a human being can influence so much, and you ask really simple questions. If you've got a capability of whatever technology is in front of us, we need to ask superhuman questions. Yeah,
and if you think about these local markets that now exist, for example, we've seen the rental market, if you're renting a tux for an evening or something else, and that's great. It's a good play. But also when people hit troubled times in their lives and careers, they might have some illness or whatever that prevents them from working. Well, they're sat on a lot of asset. There's some of their wardrobe that they would normally wear that they're not going to wear now for a year while they get themselves right. could be something exactly that someone wants to wear to a ball or to a special event. If I can't play golf for a year, why wouldn't I rent those golf clubs out to someone that's thinking of starting up the game? So we could start to give, and there's history with that. There's also an understanding about where it's come from, and I think that will bring communities together. I can't help feeling, I don't always catch the show, but in the UK, there's this Antiques Roadshow. I'm sure there's different versions in other countries. But I love history. And if I look and then there's an item that surprises everyone, but it hasn't quite been looked after over the years. But you rely on these experts to make best guesses as to, the validity of that product and the fact that it's the only one left in the world, but if it wasn't damaged. Well, if we have had RFID then, and there was a real value in understanding it, perhaps the things that are really worth looking after, people would be able to do that more.
You could look at trends from the past to say, okay, this is the first version of a new piece of technology. Likelihood is that it probably is going to be worth something in the future. So maybe put that in a cupboard somewhere and keep that.
Imagine, Malcolm, like you said at the start of the first episode, that very first Space Invaders game would have had an RFID tag on. Have you still got it, Mark? And we could go and track that down, and the historic value, because it was a British invention.
And I never knew that. I never knew it.
It doesn't even say it on the internet. It says it's a Japanese invention by Taito. And I met the gentleman from Taito that came round to our house, and my dad sold them the idea. And so, it's those type of key things. And that's important to me personally. But actually, we're talking about people being able to sometimes get food on the table and for another man to be throwing it away because it's deemed not fit. And those are critical decisions in where we need to improve.
And again, there is an awful lot of knowledge from the past in terms of parents and grandparents that actually had tighter budgets and knew how to manage.
Yes.
And we've lost some of that.
Yep.
And I think we've got to replay that intelligence back in. So part of Ample was actually teaching people how to make more out of their money. Because the view just in terms of food, I mean, you were looking at £400 to £800 a year that everybody throws away. Now, for some, that's maybe not so much. It's not so bad, but I think for the vast majority of us, especially when we've had the inflation that we've gone through recently, that'd be money that would be good to have in the bank.
Yeah, sure.
So I would suggest that we've had a long talk. This has been longer than the previous two, and as well it might be. And I could talk literally for hours with Mark in terms of what is the future going to be and what are the future potential. But what I would like the listener to do is to go and have a bit of a think and say, how good are we really? We've talked about digitalisation, but what about democratisation of digital? What value is it actually really bringing to the consumer? So instead of actually using it, and I would say slightly manipulatively, why don't we actually change the focus to do good? Actually, by doing good, I think there is actual profit and new businesses to build. So, thanks to Mark.
Thank you, Malcolm.
So that's the conclusion to another Logistics Collective podcast. If you do want to track and follow us, we're available on all the normal podcast channels, so including Spotify, Apple and many others. Or you can listen to us on logisticscollective.com. And we also publish on YouTube as well for those that prefer that as a channel. I look forward to speaking to you soon.
You can get in contact by email, podcast@logisticscollective.com, or leave a voice message on our website, logisticscollective.com. The podcast is a production by Loguru.